So anterior approach is actually truly a minimal invasive technique in the sense that it is not involving any muscle damage. Means if you go posteriorly, we have to cut all the external rotators, but anteriorly we are actually going through the muscles, and even those muscles are being supplied by separate nerves. So it's a intramuscular as well as interneural plane. Anterior approach was actually started by Jude in 1947 with very valid reasons, because for a layman, hip is a posterior structure, but for an orthopedic surgeon, hip is an anterior structure in body. So it's very logical to approach the hip anteriorly. And we are not detaching any muscle. That adds to the benefit to the patient, because most of these patients who are coming to us for arthroplasty, they are most of the times either bedridden or their activities are limited before the surgery. So if we further damage the muscles during surgery, their recovery becomes very retarded and prolonged. So we are basically helping the patient if we use the anterior approach. Anterior approach was more and more used after 60s when Chanley started the hip replacement with consistent results. But a new problem was that the initial approach advised by Sir Chanley involved a trochanteric osteotomy. And we all know that trochanteric osteotomy has its own complications. Because of that, people started looking for alternative, and that is posterior approach, and which is more common now. The advantages, as we have already discussed, no muscle damage, and especially hip deltoid, that is gluteus medius, it is preserved. We know most of us are using posterior approach. We know that we put lots of stress and abrasions on the gluteus medius when we are doing posterior approach. So that is a clear advantage. Second, because patient is supine, so we can easily measure the leg length during the surgery. Number two, because the patient is supine parallel to the floor, we can adjust the inclination as well as the anteversion of the cup. In posterior approach, we have to use various gadgets to confirm whether my cup position is correct or not. And the most dreaded complication after hip replacement, that is dislocation, doesn't happen in anterior approach because we are not cutting the posterior capsule as well as the external rotators. And we can perform bilateral hip replacement, though generally we don't like doing bilateral hip replacements, unlike knee replacement. But if you want to, you can do both hips at the same time because we don't have to change the position of the patient. And last line that is relevant in this technique that was just shown to us, body mass index, because there are studies which tell us that if the body mass index is not favorable, there are high chances of trochanteric fracture, hematoma, and all those things. But the technique that the surgeon just showed us, it's an excellent technique that they are lifting the femur with a hook. That means we are not putting too much stress on the trochanter, and more importantly, we don't have to depend on our assistant's strength and patience for lifting the femur, because it's a very difficult task. If you give to some assistant, generally we use a bone hook and ask the assistant to lift the femur. It's really a torture, and after some time the femur slightly goes down and we start improvising on the technique, which leads to complications. So I think this is, everyone knows it, how we take history and examination. I don't need to elaborate on that. And these are our pre-anesthetic assessments so that we don't encounter any complication during or after the surgery. This is a very good slide. It clearly shows that the rotation of the feet while taking the anteroposterior x-ray of the pelvis is so much important, especially for young surgeons who are just starting practice. This is a very important slide. You can easily see the difference between the slide A, the photograph A and photograph C. In this, you can see that the neck seems to be very short, means seems that the head is almost touching the trochanter. But when you go inside and you see this length, you will be surprised. All your calculations will be incorrect, and your surgical planning will be, especially when you are doing your first, second, third surgeries, you'll be puzzled. So when you do an X-ray in internal rotation, you will see the actual anatomy of the neck and you can plan accordingly. So this is a very good X-ray. And one more point that I would like to add, whenever you take X-ray of the hip, always take X-ray both hips APU, not because I have seen many times that especially patients who are coming from periphery, they get a simple X-ray, single X-ray, means X-ray of the single hip. By that, you are not able to assess the pelvic tilt, you are not able to compare both the hips. So it's always advisable to take an X-ray of the pelvis with both hips APU. So implant selection and all that we do, I think this is not the topic, so we'll not elaborate about it, we'll not talk in detail. So young patients usually use ceramic and metallic in old patients. Templating, though I have seen very few people who are doing regular pre-operative templating, but it is very useful if you are doing it regularly. Though we have all the implant sizes available on table at the time of surgery, which is the right approach because you don't know what you suddenly require during the surgery. So everything should be available, but it gives you a general and fair idea which size of the implant that you are going to use. And it helps us give some information about the hip biomechanics, which we are recreating after the surgery. So in anterior approach, one thing that I would like to add in this slide is that this approach is especially useful for patients who are having flexion deformity, especially patients like in ankylosing spondylitis or long-standing AVN. We see flexion deformity, and it's difficult for a new surgeon to release flexion deformity from posterior approach. Though with experience, we have devised ways how to release the rectus and the anterior capsule even from the posterior approach, but let me tell you, it's difficult. It's really difficult. So it's all more important that we should be well versed with the anterior approach because we might need it at least in those cases where there is fixed flexion deformity. But of course, if you need to augment the posterior acetabulum, then posterior approach is of course the better, especially in old fracture dislocation cases. Skin should be good and implant size has to be predetermined. And of course, we have to see the level of hip center, which has to be determined and restored. Surgical table. Generally, we operate on standard tables, but especially the type of table they are showing in this video, many centers or many surgeons may not have that sort of table, so that could be a drawback. Patient positioning, very well illustrated, you can see that. One important point that I noticed during the video was that the opposite limb was placed and supported on a Mayo's table or something like that. The important point about that is that it doesn't allow your spine to hyperextend. When you keep the opposite limb supported, it keeps your spine neutral. So that doesn't change your cup position. So that was a very important point. So you can, and of course they showed us that they are using fluoroscopy during the surgery. We rarely use it, so that is slightly different, but it adds to the accuracy and the result. Computer navigation, I don't know how many people are in favor of computer navigation during joint replacement in general and hip replacement in particular. And always ensure optimum placement of implant before leaving the operating room. I think that is the biggest advantage of using fluoroscopy during surgery. So it gives you peace of mind when you leave the OT. So that is how they position the patient, and both legs are freely draped to be moved in any direction. And while they are broaching, the femur had to be elevated. So it makes the job of the surgeon easier, and it leads to less soft tissue damage and minimal stress on the bone, which might be osteoporotic in many patients. And we avoid periprosthetic fractures. So that is the skin incision, a line joining the lateral border of patella and ASIS. This is the line, but we take slightly below and posterior to the ASIS. We start around 2 to 3 centimeter below and posterior, because that is the exact plane between the muscles, plus it avoids the lateral cutaneous nerve damage, as we discussed. So that is the right plane between tensor and sartorius muscle. So after the skin incision, we have to palpate the tensor, medial border of tensor fascia lata. Always take a reference from the anterior superior iliac spine. So first we have to incise the fascia lying over the muscle. Then, as was shown in the video, you put your finger around the medial border of tensor between the fascia and the muscle fibers and reach the intermuscular septum, so that tensor lies on the lateral side and sartorius on the medial side. Important point here is that many surgeons who will be starting anterior approach, they might find a differentiation between or identification of plane between tensor fascia and sartorius difficult. So the easier way is that you put the limb in external rotation if it is possible. It is not possible in all the patients, especially with stiff hips. If you can put the limb in like a figure of 4 position or slightly external rotated and flexed, the plane between the TFL and sartorius becomes very prominent, especially in the lower half of the incision. So you can start from there, at least identify the muscles and then give the incision in the fascia. It makes your life easier. So I think this is what we are just discussing about. And sartorius, of course, goes medially, and tensor fascia lata goes medially. So I think it's laterally. So I think we can differentiate very clearly. So we have to free the muscle fibers from the fascia anteriorly as well as medially. It's all finger dissection, no knife. And then once you breach the intermuscular septum, you go slightly deeper. Then you can identify this fat along with this artery, lateral circumflex ascending branch, along with 2 veins, always accompanied by 2 veins. It is very important to identify it for 2 reasons. One, that it says that we are at the right level and right plane, plus it bleeds a lot if left without coagulation. So we have to coagulate it immediately. It leads to post-op comfort, no hematoma, and many people don't even put drain. So this is a very important landmark in this approach. At a deeper level, once we go inside, the plane initially it is between tensor fascia and sartorius. When we go inside, it is between gluteus medius and your rectus. So you have to identify that. The identification is again easy by a fat pad. You can see the fat there, which is always between the gluteus medius and the rectus. And this fat leads us to the joint capsule actually. All right. On the anterior capsule, we should identify the reflected head of the rectus, and we should erase it slowly and put a blunt foramen there. Never use a sharp foramen, because we should be careful that just medial to the rectus, there are vessels, femoral vessels. So we have to be very careful. So always use blunt foramen on this side. So the idea is to expose the capsule entirely. So you can see your lateral circumflex vessels in the picture. All right. So I think we have discussed all this. So you remove the fat pad, which will identify your anterior capsule, identify the reflected head. So one of our blunt foramen goes right beyond the anterior column, just underneath your iliopsoas. The second retractor goes inferior to the neck. So capsule, as we always do in posterior approach as well, some people incise it in T shape, some people in H shape. We have to reach right up to the intertrochanteric line, and we know that intertrochanteric line is the landmark from where the vastus lateralis goes distally and the capsule goes proximally. So right up to that, we have to release the capsule so that we can see the whole of the neck and head easily. So on the both sides of the femoral neck, we put two retractors. So one medially, one superior, and one inferior. Some people use weight that can means you need one assistant less. So this is the standard osteotomy, but there are some very good points mentioned here that they advise that we should make two cuts in the neck. And we should remove that wafer in between, and it makes removal of the head easier. And in the video they showed that we should put a Steinmann pin and take it out. Actually what I use, I put a Schein's pin instead. It makes it grips the head better, and it makes the removal of the head much easier. C-arm, I don't think it's actually required for the osteotomy because you see everything in front of you. One more point that I would like to add is that there are certain patients like ankylosing spondylitis patient in which you find that the patient has not only flexion deformity but also external rotation deformity. And when you go there with posterior approach, it's very, very difficult because your greater trochanter is actually, when it is externally rotated, the space between the posterior lip of acetabulum and the trochanter is minimal, and the sciatic nerve is lying very close. So putting a saw there for the neck osteotomy is almost impossible. So I think this approach is very useful in these patients. So many times the ligament is just ruptured when you twist the head. Now the leg is externally rotated, and we can palpate the lesser trochanter, the length of the remaining neck, whether we want to cut more. All the time we have to protect the TFL muscle. And if the removal of femoral head is difficult, you can ask your assistant to give some traction. It makes the joint easier to easier for the head to be taken out. C-arm means we are not using it regularly, but of course it always adds to that. So acetabular retractors, 11 o'clock, 7 and 4 if you are operating on the left side. Labrum is excised. I think these are the standard steps that we are using in all our arthroplasties. Initial reamer has to be aimed at the teardrop. People who are doing it regularly, they know it, that first we have to aim at the teardrop, and then gradually we have to direct superiorly. And then sequential reamers are used to enlarge the acetabulum till we get a bleeding bone if we are using a non-cemented cup. So we can use the landmarks for our version and inclination. Again, they advise using fluoroscopy for seeing the position of the cup. Sometimes we put screws for the extra stability of the cup. Young patient is generally not required, but if the bone is osteoporotic or you're doing a revision, then putting the screws is must. All right, so acetabulum, once it's over, then we start with the femur. So the preferable position of the cup is 40 and 20. That is 40 is inclination and 20 is anteversion. But sometimes you have to change according to the patient, or sometimes because of the pelvic tilt, or because of the available bone. So for the femur preparation, the leg has to be put in figure of 4. Adduction and 90 degrees of external rotation are must. As they have shown in the video, they lower the leg around 45 degrees so that the trochanteric area can be well visualized without putting too much traction on the muscle. And they are using that hook. That is something really good. Means I don't know whether it's available with us or not in India, but it's something really good. So all the time we have to protect the posterior capsule and the rotators. Though we have to expose the trochanter, so that we go as lateral as possible, but take care not to damage the piriformis and the posterior capsule. So hip extension, as is shown in the video, as we discussed earlier, the other limb has to be placed on the muscle stand or some sort of support so that the spine is not hyperextended. Minimal pressure on the soft tissues. I would prefer putting this hook not inside the canal but behind the femur, next to the gluteus maximus tendon. That is much safer, because if the bone is osteoporotic, you can cause fracture here. And table mounted hook is definitely better than using someone's help. So as we do in posterior approach, we use a double pronged retractor to lift the trochanter so that we can see the canal. And one retractor on the medial side of the neck. Complete release of posterior capsule doesn't mean that we got all the capsule, but the capsule which is basically obstructing our visualization of the trochanter from where we are starting our broaching, only that part of the capsule should be excised. And one thing, another thing that I noticed in the video is that they are excising the anterior capsule. I think we should, instead of excising the capsule, we should leave the flaps intact and we should repair it. It adds to the stability. Why to excise something that is giving extra support to the hip joint? So we start reaming right down through the center of the femoral axis. That's very important. Should not begin until exposure is adequate. We should not force our way inside. We should be comfortable while broaching, while reaming. We should not be elevating or pushing the femur in any direction, because we can perforate the cortex. Whenever we open the medullary cavity, of course, we can expect some bleeding. Some people use this pre-treatment for hemostasis. We can always wait, and then we start with our box of Storm. This was the point that I was saying. Never try to force your way, because with some experience you'll find out that if you are not comfortable, if your broach is not going comfortably inside, or you are not reaming without extra force, means if there is something wrong, you'll find it. So it is something with experience, but always this complication should be avoided. If this happens and you are working in a standalone center, then things are really difficult to handle and explain to the family. So we should always avoid. So the first line is, that's why very important, that exposure should be adequate. Don't aim for a smaller incision when you are starting the arthroplasties. Make a bigger incision, look at all the structures, make a proper wide exposure. And with time, gradually you will see that the 50% of the incision is unnecessary, but let it come to you. Don't start doing 8 centimeter or 7 centimeter incision MIS technique. That comes with time. So sequential broaching, always keep an eye on the anteversion. And we enter the canal at the post. I think these are the basics. We all know about it. And we always aim towards the lateral edge, because we want to be on the valgus side, not on the varus side when we put the stem. And with fluoroscopy, you can find that the canal is properly filled by the largest broach. Though you can feel it, means how much force to use, when to stop, that comes with experience, but fluoroscopy can help you initially. All right. Then we do the trial. So as to assess, so that is the biggest advantage of this approach, that we can see the leg length at this stage, and if any adjustments have to be made, they should be done now. So we do all these movements to see how stable our hip is. And we have to see the correct soft tissue tension. Soft tissue balancing is very important in knee replacement, but it is equally important in hip replacement. Our telescoping, our capsule, everything should be optimum before we decide on the final size of the neck and offset. So after the final confirmation with fluoroscope, you can close it. Post-operative, this varies actually according to which type of implant you're using, what is the patient's body weight, what is your protocol, whether the acetabulum was stable without screws, or you have put screws, or whether you have augmented anterior or posterior wall. So it depends on lots of factors. So you cannot just make a generalization about it. You can decide it there and then. So it varies according to the patient and varies with the surgeons. So these are two things that should be avoided in every patient. We should be very careful about it. Means this is like very uncommon in anterior approach because we are not damaging the posterior structures, but we should be careful in patients with the anteroposterior pelvic inclination, especially in ankylosing, where there are high chances of anterior dislocation. So we should be careful about it. Abductor insufficiency is again uncommon in anterior approach, but if you go through literature, chances of trochanteric fracture are more common in anterior approach. So the technique that they are using with that hook and by making a 45-degree angle of femur and hip when they are broaching the femur, that is excellent, and there are minimal chances of trochanteric fracture. So this technique actually makes anterior approach far easier than what we have been knowing till now. So if we have all these things available, then anterior approach is much better than posterior approach. Maybe initially it will be difficult in first few patients, but once you get used to it, I think it's better than posterior approach. So these things can happen, especially if you are doing a revision surgery. You should expect these things: difficult cases, dysplasia patients, severe deformity, fixed hips. Then you can expect these things. They can happen. So as a rule, you should have your trauma setup, your plates and screws and wires ready for every patient, because managing the complication there and then is far easier. From anesthesia point of view, from family point of view, it's far easier to manage it there and then, instead of postponing the case and explain to the family and then coming again to the OT. Though Dr. Ashish and anesthesia people might have different opinions, especially medical legal issues, because these days the guidelines from medical legal point of view is that if you are taking consent for one procedure, this is a very controversial thing, but I think I'm sharing with you. If you are taking consent for hip replacement, and if there is a fracture in between, whether you should go for fracture fixation, this is means open for discussion, whether we should fix the fracture or not, because you have not taken consent for a fracture fixation. So this topic was discussed many times, but still we don't have a clear answer. From the medical point of view, I think it should be fixed there and then so that the patient doesn't suffer. But if you go from legal point of view, I don't know what is the best answer for it. Anyway, so again, fracture generally happen when we are not exposing fully. Nerve injuries, especially in posterior approach. You can see some foot drops off and on, but with an experienced surgeon, this is a rarity, very uncommon. You should be careful when you are doing a resurgery, because sciatic nerve sometimes gets into the fibrosis, which is lying just posterior to your hip, and you are not able to differentiate where the nerve starts and where it ends. So you should be very careful in the revision surgery. So start dissecting from distal to proximal, so that you identify the area which you are not supposed to enter. So during COVID, I think elective surgeries should be on the back burner. We are basically now dealing with emergencies only, and they can wait. I think these patients with the hip and knee arthritis, they should wait for the surgery till this thing is over, because the mortality rate is high in patients being operated right now. So again, medical legal issues. We are not, as a rule, in our hospital at least, we are not taking COVID positive patients for elective surgeries. I think most of us are not doing that, except in emergencies. We are not taking COVID positive patients for surgery. Thank you very much, and I think now we must have some questions.